It's kind of funny, guys, because, whilst I'm there at work, working away, doing menial tasks that allow my mind to wander and I can think about stuff just because I'm sorting out a million nuts and bolts and washers and that sort of thing, I'm thinking about, what video I want to upload this afternoon. I want to do some hard-hitting information, something to really bring truth and philosophy to everyone around the world and help advocate the cause for libertarianism stuff. I'm thinking away and I've got a few ideas which will be coming up shortly. But as they say, no plan survives first contact with the enemy, and as soon as I get home, I see on social media a friend has sent me a news article, and it's just the most wild and wacky thing you've ever seen in the world, so let's get on with it. So the US government has declared Grindr a national security risk. So let's have a read about this. So Grindr, one of the most popular dating apps within the LGBTQ... Hang on a minute. Isn't it supposed to be the LGBTQQIXA community? Bunch of bigots. That community is up for sale after a US government panel declared it a national security risk. So a report from Reuters says Chinese gaming company Beijing Kulan Tech Co. Limited decided to sell the app, which it owned for 3 years, after learning about the designation from the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. So it's unclear what the committee's concerns were, but US officials, have been increasingly wary of Chinese-owned companies handling extensive amounts of personal data for Americans, especially if military or government personnel might use these products or services. This is something really interesting that we're moving into, or have been within for a long time within the West, within the developed world, within the industrialized world. You remember that old saying, knowledge is power? Well, there's a lot of information to collect on people out there on the internet, and a lot of it is to do with money. So as we're going to be seeing here in just a second, Grindr was essentially collecting a bit of data that could have been used for monetary purposes. So with Facebook, it can collate what you sort of like, what you're looking at and things like that from other sites, and then you suddenly get ads on Facebook. And you can actually fake this if you, or spoof the system, so to speak, if you go to your friends and say, wow, I really liked, this thing at McDonald's, and you include all the product names and stuff like that, or just copy paste an ad or something, you'll start getting ads from McDonald's and things like that on your feed. It's very interesting. So Grindr had already been under public scrutiny after revelations last year that it was sharing the HIV status of users without their permission. That's pretty fucked. The crackdown is the latest in a series of moves against Chinese businesses by the Trump administration, which is already seeking to ban all telecom equipment from Huawei Technologies. The company is suing to block that action. So the decision to sell will likely mean an end, at least temporary, to the planned IPO at Grindr. The group bought its stake back in 2016, and the app, as of 2016, boasted 27 million users. That's very interesting. So yeah, something that continuing on from what I mentioned, So let's check out what happened when Grindr was caught showing its users' HIV status. So this was reported back in 2016. So gay dating app Grindr, it's not really a dating app, is it? But it sounds nicer. At least that's my perception of what Grindr and Tinder and things like that are. They're not really for establishing romantic relationships. It's more like a pump and dump sort of thing. So it's admitted to sharing its users' private health data. So Monday, back in 2018, not 2016, my bad, BuzzFeed reported that the app had allowed 2 outside companies to view the HIV status of its users along with other personal information. So there are 2 companies in question, Aptimize and Localytics, were reportedly paid to monitor and test the performance of the Grindr app. As part of this work, they were given access to the user's HIV status and the date of the most recent test, as well as their location, gender, age, and physical type. Now, what we don't know is what these 2 companies, Aptimize and Localytics, were allowed to do with this information, because what they could have done is taken this HIV status location and sell that data on for additional profit, and use that to essentially perform targeted ads and that sort of thing. Because you need to understand that localized internet ads can get extremely specific. I've heard they can get down to a 4-kilometer squared radius. So, for example, within your local suburb or local area or town or whatever, they can specifically target your town's McDonald's, if we keep using that example, or a specific town in your area or a local chain or something like that. It's incredible what they can do with even a small bit of information. But yeah, if you give them location, gender, age, and physical type, that's a lot of information to run off, and you can really start targeting some HIV ads at people, that sort of thing. So Grindr initially denied that it was sharing the HIV status of its users, writing on Twitter that Grindr has never, nor will ever, sell personally identified user information. So obviously they're just lying to save face. It's a very bad PR move to be stealing people's information without their permission. So of course you had the second move in the PR handbook, which is to change tack and defend your practice. So what they said to BuzzFeed as, these are standard practices in the mobile app ecosystem. Now that's pretty interesting to me. And as a bit of a tangent, I find this very interesting, this practice of what I call universalization. So when an individual is called out on something, they just, attribute it to everyone. It's sort of everyone does it, that sort of thing. I remember questioning someone back in high school as to why they shoplifted, and they basically just said, everyone shoplifts, what does it matter? And it's very interesting that you can sort of deny yourself personal responsibility and essentially personal ethics by just universalizing it, I should say, to a group, and acting like that takes anything away from you as an individual. Very interesting. So Grindr leader proceeded to publish a full statement, the third move in the PR playbook, which included a defense that users are given the, quote, option to post information about themselves, including HIV status and last test date, and making it clear in their privacy policy that if you choose to include this information in your profile, the information will also become public. Now, does that sort of alleviate them from what they've done? So they're given that option to publish it, but were these companies getting a look at people's HIV status? I suppose if you put it on the app, they can't actually see it, so I guess that sort of makes sense. So, after coming under fire, rightfully so, it ceased sharing its users' HIV status with those of third-party companies. Nevertheless, Grindr's head of security told Axios that many concerns that had arisen were due to a misunderstanding of what was being shared and with whom. This is quite a common thing nowadays. It is safe to assume that anything you put online is being shared with all kinds of companies and that sort of thing. And what's important to remember about especially Chinese companies is that because China is this sort of weird communistic model. It's not really communistic anymore because they do have this extremely unregulated market, far more unregulated and more capitalistic than any Western market. But they're still incredibly authoritarian. So if your information gets to one of these businesses that is basically controlled by the state, well, yeah, if you share information with a Chinese company, it can easily end up in the hands of the Chinese state, which is essentially why the US is so concerned, because they don't want any information about their security personnel getting to the Chinese government. It's still a grand chessboard. They are still competing in a military sense. It's just, I wouldn't even call it a Cold War. It is just, showing off and some saber rattling every now and again and that sort of thing. So what this head of security argued was that the recent revelations surrounding Facebook data being used by Cambridge Analytica led people to conflate the two, emphasizing that in Grindr's case, the third-party companies were used to debug and optimize the app. Yet, they were used to debug and optimize the app, but they were probably selling on the data themselves. I mean, why wouldn't you? The data has reportedly been deleted from Optimize and is in the process of being moved from Lock Analytics. So that's really interesting. If the data is being deleted from Optimize and being removed from that other app, doesn't that mean that they have that data to hand? I mean, if you're just using it to debug and optimize the app, why do you need to store the data in some capacity? Again, that just makes me think, and I'm not very tech literate at all, but why do you need to store something if you're just there to fix it, essentially, or optimize it? Like if I'm in the workshop at work and I'm going to do a service on a vehicle, I don't need to take the parts home with me and store them at my house. I just leave them where they are. That may not be the greatest analogy because I'm going from sort of plant mechanics to internet online stuff that I don't know really anything about. But if anyone can explain that to me, I'd be very appreciative. But to me, it seems like they were storing the data so that they could sell it on for a profit. I just want us to take a step back here for a second and just think about how crazy this world is we live in, when we have one country worried about another country spying on their military personnel by them collecting and receiving data from a gay, lesbian, transgender, you name it, dating app. How funny is that? Like, it's like that meme where it's like, oh, I bet in 2019 we'll have jetpacks and rockets and cool shit like that. And no, what do we have? We have foreign espionage through gay hookup apps. It's so fucking wild and wacky. I mean, people back in the day, they did predict a lot of shit very accurately. You can go back to the Victorian times, and there were designs for what is essentially a video chatting service like Skype, where they had like a big projector on the wall and stuff like that, and people accurately predicted like the internet and things like that. But no one seems to have predicted this, which I think is pretty funny, because how could you? Thanks all for sticking around.